Good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. Paul Simeone, VP Medical Director for Behavioral Health at Lee, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's events. As you know, organizing programs such as this is no small feat, especially given the times we're currently in. Given this, I'd like to acknowledge those organizations, donors, and individuals without whom we could not have made this happen. First, I'd like to thank the Healthy Lee Behavioral Health Coalition, which not only sponsored the inaugural Normal is Overrated event, but also this second gathering as well. We can't thank them enough for kindly providing the generous financial and operational support that they've given us. Next, we need to give a big shout out to our title sponsor, Kids Minds Matter, which, as you know, is a great supporter of community events such as this. As their humble emissary, I want to say how happy we are to sponsor a student-led event, which is why today will be so impactful. We also want to recognize Sullivan State Farm, B&I Contractors, Park Royal Hospital, the David Lawrence Center, FSU Center for Child Stress, Valerie's House, Studio Plus, Centerstone, Hazelton Betty Ford, and Hope Clubhouse for their key contributions as well, along with all of the other generous donors who are listed on your program. Thank you all for your dedication and your giving spirit in making today's program a success. In addition to those already mentioned, we also need to acknowledge a handful of truly amazing worker bees who, as usual, went above and beyond the call of duty. Cheryl Schlichter from Healthy Lee, Lauren Walker, Project Manager at the Center for Population Health at Lee Health, Deb Camella from the Lee County Coalition of Drug-Free Southwest Florida, and the many members of the Healthy Lee Behavioral Health Coalition who attended meetings, populated work groups, and offered up their talents, expertise, and goodwill. Thank you, thank you, thank you all. Finally, I wish to give a shout out to our founding student, Carly McGovern, without whom this event would not be. I know you're watching us virtually, Carly, and like us, you're so proud of this year's student support, who are all continuing your dream. The student support I speak of includes 3 rising seniors who joined this year's event, bravely stepping into the role that Carly created for herself last year. Let us please give a warm round of applause to Carly and her team, Ellie Belcastro, Sophia Herrero, and Ryan Charla. These students truly went above and beyond in making this year's event possible, especially given the hurdles that we've all been facing as a result of the pandemic. Taking Normal is Overrated and making it a fully virtual event is something truly to admire. And I know that all of you who are watching can appreciate what goes into something like this. Not only will we be able to continue this annual event, which was very important to us within our region, but it is now reaching well beyond the borders of Southwest Florida into several other states as well. I'll let the students fill you in on all of those really exciting details. There are just a few other important things that I want to say. Normal is Overrated. Our effort to break down barriers and reduce mental health discrimination was always conceived as a community conversation. In fact, the Healthy Lee Coalition has this as its informal charter to convene community neighbors, individuals, families, and groups in service of addressing mental health issues with compassion, honesty, and acceptance. Given the state of our broken world, we need to talk and be together to understand ourselves, our situation, and our common humanity. This is the first step on the path to healing. So what we're going to hear today will be many things, some sad, others painful, but all courageous and uplifting, because it's our collective journey that is our ultimate destination. Talking to one another, facing hard truths about what it means to be human can be challenging, but in the end, this is going to come as a great relief. For some of you, this will be especially difficult as the stories, feelings, and memories expressed and re-experienced may leave you in a shaky place. If that occurs, fear not, as we have a number of national resources in the thumbtack section our banner area of the screen. We also will share this information on the chat box. Although we may, although we may hear some stories of sadness or struggles today, we are all in this together, and these brave students who are going to share their stories with us is very robust testimony to that fact. Remember, none of us ends this event without having access to helpful resources. Okay, are we ready to meet Ellie, Sophia, and Ryan, our wonderfully amazing students and our panel members? I have to tell you from the bottom of my heart, I'm really excited about what we're going to hear today and what's to come, and I hope you are too. Let's do it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sophia Herrero, and I want to welcome you to Is Overrated 2020. I am privileged to be part of a wonderful team of student planners this year. Joined with me are Ellie and Ryan, and we have worked these past few months to put on this event for you. And the shift to virtual, while it has been very difficult, we have taken this step, and we hope to share this event to you even in this unprecedented time. Of course, today would not have been possible without all your attendance, so I thank you for taking your time out of your day to attend our event. Before we get started, I'll share a little about myself, why I decided to join Is Overrated this year to lead it, and why I think an event such as this is so important. I'm currently a senior at Fort Myers High School in the IB program, and I hope to attend UF in the coming years. I'm good friends with founder of Is Overrated, Carly McGovern, which is how I found out about Is Overrated. I have my own struggles with mental illness, which my problems mostly stem from being embarrassed and disappointed with myself. I thought people would despise me and lose the hope in my family because I was not normal. It is this stigma that Is Overrated tries to break through providing an opportunity for others to share their stories, to share with others that suffer from the same thing and those that know them, that they are not alone. Our speakers today are anything but weak. They are showing extreme courage by standing up here today and sharing their stories with you. It's a privilege to have worked with them, and I am so honored to see how far they've grown and how far they've come since their interviews and how they stand before you today. I can only hope that you will all leave this event a bit more inspired and a bit more aware of the stigma and issues surrounding mental illness in our community. Because after all, normal is a bit overrated. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ellie Belcastro, and I am another one of the student planners for Is Overrated. I'm currently a senior in the IB program at Fort Myers High School. I was introduced to Carly through a friend of ours, and I could not be more grateful that that happened and that Carly invited me to be a part of this event. Mental health advocacy is so important to me because mental illness is so prevalent, especially in high schoolers, and yet we try to avoid talking about it. Why? When we pretend that mental illness does not exist, we tell people who are suffering that they are alone. This event means so much to me because it shows that nobody is alone in their struggle. There is always some help, and there is always someone who understands what you, your friends, or your family are going through. I'm so honored to be a part of an event that breaks the stigma surrounding mental illness. The speakers you're about to hear from are truly outstanding students, and I am so proud of them for telling us their stories because I know it is not easy to tell us something so personal. I think we can all learn a lot from these students. I hope you're as excited about Is Overrated as we are about bringing it to you today. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ryan Charlo, and I'm a senior at Canterbury High School this year. I'm a part of both the varsity football and basketball teams, and also participate in science fair and weightlifting in my free time. I've wanted to do a community service project involving mental health awareness for some time now, and luckily I've been in touch with Carly McGovern, who started this event, since early elementary school. So I reached out to her and was able to join Ellie and Sophia and start planning this event for the past year. I really think this event and this cause is important for kids to know about, as it's extremely prevalent, but not talked about nearly as much as it needs to be. I hope that through this event and through these speakers, someone watching will realize that they are not alone in their struggles with mental health, and that there is so much support out there for them through not only this program, but through all programs that work to break the stigmas surrounding youth mental health. Now, with that said, we have some very powerful speakers lined up today. Our very first speaker is Cole Yates, a senior at Canterbury High School as well, an active member in the Canterbury community. Being the first male cheerleader in school history, as well as starting the school's first LGBTQ plus club at our school, and Cole has definitely made an impact. Cole's story will be one that strives to show that no one should be ashamed in who they are. I would now like to welcome Cole Yates up to the podium.
Hello. When I first entered high school, I assumed that I had myself all figured out, but I was in fact very wrong. I went through a very important self-discovery in middle school. Walking in the halls, I always felt as if I was fairly different from the rest of my peers, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. I was bullied throughout those years, and this forced me to grow and come to terms with who I really was. Most of the bullying I had endured stemmed from being too feminine or not fitting in with the masculine normalities that society has figuratively written. Seeing that my peers felt as if something was quote unquote wrong with who I was, I started to believe that as well. The words that others directed towards me damaged my psyche, and the situation spiraled out of control until one day I reached my final breaking point. My sister picked me up one September evening, and that day specifically, I had let the powers of others' words afflict me more than ever before. My sister then asked me if I was okay, and if you can relate, if you aren't generally okay and someone asks you if you're okay, you start to cry. I started to break down in tears. She kept asking me what was wrong, but I couldn't even explain the situation in fear that I was the one that was in the wrong. We had then arrived at my home, and I had wiped away my tears, composed myself, and walked in. I had made my way to my room and immediately walked in front of my mirror. I sat there and just stared at myself, not really knowing what the purpose of looking intimately into my own eyes was, but, you know, I soon realized that I needed to convince myself that I was not who everyone portrayed me to be. I soon began to say over and over, I am not gay. And girl, was I wrong? I stopped in between the sentences and just sat in silence for a bit. And for a moment, I felt like I really need to be genuine with myself. I then said, I am gay, and dramatically covered my mouth. I couldn't believe that I had released something that I wanted to hide from the world out forever. It was finally real at this point. From that day on, I haven't looked back. Although I cannot say that I haven't struggled with my self-identity, that day I made an immense amount of progress in my self-discovery journey. Moving forward from middle school, I became much more comfortable in my own skin, becoming the first varsity male cheerleader at Canterbury. As one example, I started sharing my thoughts and feelings that I had never thought of sharing before, not only with others, but with myself. My mental health was on the incline, and I believe that because of this, and because that I discovered and accepted the substantial part of myself, I had everything else figured out from this point on. But when I began high school, my self-identity became somewhat non-existent. I began to conform to others' ways of thinking, and the worst part was I wasn't aware of these changes whatsoever. At times, I was able to pull myself out of this blissful ignorance, yet emotionally I began to decline, and because of this, I hid from my own emotions. I was living through others that I had surrounded myself with, and in the process, I was getting treated like an accessory rather than a friend. This continued for the entirety of my freshman and the beginning of my sophomore year, until I began to rekindle my friendships with people outside my small circle that I had created around myself. The best way possible for me to explain the situation to you that happened afterwards is with an analogy. These old friends ripped off these rose-colored glasses that I had figuratively superglued to my face, and wow, did it hurt. I started to see situations for how they really appeared. My mental health started to spiral out of control at this point, and at some points it felt as if I really need to be reminded of who I was. I had spent so much time reinventing myself for others that I felt as if I need to backtrack and almost retrace steps from my past years. I was more terrified than ever to start this journey because it made me feel as if I was taking many steps back. But in fact, I was taking the largest step forward. Looking back, I was very mentally unstable for a period of time, yet I felt free. When speaking to feeling free, I mean that I was free to my own thoughts and I could finally be genuine with myself again. The start of my junior year was quite intimidating, as it is for most. I walked into the doors of Canterbury with the same mindset as freshman year, yet I vowed to make a difference in my small community. I started by founding the first ever LGBTQ+ club at Canterbury. My school, having a very small student body, LGBTQ rights and the history of the community were not widely spoken about, and I felt as if I needed to change that. The club became my baby. I put in a lot of time and effort to make changes that I thought needed to happen. This club was not the only aspect of my junior year that I put 110% into. I took 4 AP courses, one being AP Physics, sadly enough, as well as receiving a lead role in my school's musical. I was so incredibly excited to embark on this new journey and everything that was being thrown my way. Yet I soon realized that this was way too much for me to handle. Rehearsals every day after school, as well as 4 AP courses, along with cheer and a job, exhausted the crap out of me. Not only was I physically exhausted, but mentally as well. I had never had time to breathe. I became very overwhelmed and my anxiety worsened over that time. Because of this, my grades began to fall and I began to fall behind in school work as well. I stopped showing up for school, sometimes missing 2 periods a day or even the day as a whole. I was done giving 110% and not getting what I expected out of this. So because of this, I quit trying altogether. I realized something was wrong when I would spend days lying in the dark in my bed, only getting up to go to the bathroom or to eat. I once again felt incredibly mentally ill, and this time I had no idea how to fix it. Over the year, my anxiety began to worsen, as well as many other bad habits. I couldn't walk into school as I feared I would overhear someone talking about a test that I had done poorly on. Things such as this ruined my day and sometimes my entire week. I began to compare my intelligence to others while also discrediting my strengths. It was a very vicious cycle. It was the end of my 3rd quarter when I had probably the worst breakdown that I can remember. I called my mom after getting my physics test score, and I didn't do as well as my other friends. I know this sounds a little crazy, but at this time it felt as if my world was ending, and no matter what I was doing, I couldn't change that. I felt helpless. My mother said that she felt as if I needed to go see someone, so I went to my physician and explained what was going on, and he referred me to a psychologist, but he also prescribed me sertraline, better known as Zoloft. Zoloft is an antidepressant, yet in my case, it works more as an anti-anxiety medication. When I went to speak with my psychologist, I had explained what I was going through, and with testing, I was diagnosed with situational depression. My situational depression is fueled by my crushing anxiety. For example, conversations and interactions throughout the day would stay locked in my mind. I would pay close attention to these situations and replay them over and over again in my head until I was basically sick. At that time, I saw no redeeming qualities in myself. When I looked in the mirror, I would simply see a failure, a good-for-nothing student, and a terrible friend. Not one day would go by that I wouldn't break down and cry. The worst part was that when I broke down, it wasn't therapeutic at all for me. I saw these mental breakdowns as being weak, fueled by my self-pity. Self-deprecating thoughts would linger in my mind. I couldn't do anything correctly, and when I would succeed, it wasn't because I put in the work and the effort to do so, it was because what I was doing was easy. I started to push everyone in my life away at this point, as I felt this would make the situation better in some sense, but in fact, I needed to work on myself. When I started Zoloft, a couple of months in, things got a lot better. I no longer felt the need to push myself beyond my limits, as well as tear myself down at the same time. This lasted for about 5 months. Then I started to realize I couldn't feel any longer. I wasn't able to cry, and when I felt happy, it just didn't seem genuine. But I was better than what I was previously feeling, of course. I started to talk to my doctor about what I was going through, and he advised that I decrease my dosage in hopes that it would give me the ability to express my emotions while also mitigating my depressive thoughts. This option worked perfect for me and is still working amazing to this day, thank God. I am able to feel while not feeling too much. Saying that out loud might sound very weird, and I totally get that, but that's how I feel, oddly enough. Speaking on medication in relation to mental illness is still quite taboo, and I believe that these stigmas need to be completely done away with. There should not be a negative connotation about bettering yourself with medication, as this is mostly coupled with therapy. For someone to understand how they feel, sometimes, especially in my case, they need to be put into a better mindset to reevaluate their thoughts in previous situations. I was one of those individuals, of course. I have been going to therapy as well as continuing with my medication, and I have never been in a better place. My senior year has been amazing so far. I have implemented everything that I have learned over the past 3 years while also keeping in mind that I have a lot more to understand. I have made it my point to never stop growing. When you feel as if you are done learning about yourself, at least I break down. Not knowing how to deal as you have created with the mental block for personal growth in your own mind. I am extremely proud of the person I am today, and that's very difficult for me to say. I came across a quote at the beginning of this year that I have lived by since, and I feel the need to share it with all of you. It reads, "I am what I am, and I am not ashamed. Never be ashamed." Never let individuals invalidate your feelings or experiences. Never be ashamed of the individual you are, because you are constantly growing and changing, molding yourself into who you will be in the future. You are who you are, and there is something genuinely beautiful about that. Thank you so much. Now there will be some words from our sponsors. Thank you.
My daughter was an honor student and an athlete, but she experienced a traumatic event that led to anxiety and depression. In her words, she was spiraling out of control, but there was no place for her to go as a minor. So we had to wait until she turned 18 to get the kind of specialized care she needed for PTSD.
That was me. It was really difficult. I felt like I was hanging on by a thread. We must acknowledge that childhood trauma is an epidemic in our country, but there aren't enough resources to treat it.
While we've made great strides, there's still a 3 to 4 month waiting list to see a pediatric provider in Southwest Florida. So we're not there yet. Adding more qualified providers is critical.
Having a child of our own who struggles significantly, we know how important the providers are. And we founded Kids Minds Matter to help create more awareness and support for children's mental health in Southwest Florida.
My daughter tried to take her own life. I knew there was a problem, and I was frustrated that we couldn't get the help she needed. It was like a slow-moving freight train that was coming. I could see it, but I couldn't stop it.
That was me.
We have processes and procedures in place to help students whenever the need arises. But most important thing is cultivating supportive relationships with our students.
After overdosing, my daughter went to the school nurse and told her what she had done. Having someone at school who she felt safe talking to probably saved her life.
We're thrilled Kids Minds Matter is helping to provide Lee Health navigators embedded in the schools. And if they can proactively help kids and families with complex mental health needs find solutions more easily, it's a win for everyone.
I've been the mental health provider, and I've been on the other side of the table as a parent of a child with severe needs. So I know how hard it is for a parent or caregiver to rise to the challenge and be an advocate for their child.
That was me. I'll admit it. I didn't want to take a parenting class. I didn't think I needed to. I'd raised my own children and know I did a good job. But once I got to the Kids Minds Matter class, I felt like I was in a college-level course, and it really made me do some soul-searching. It changed my whole approach to raising my grandson and my nephew, and I like to think Richard helped me go from good to great.
With community support, Kids Minds Matter provides parenting classes and support groups that give caregivers the tools and support they need to be their child's advocate.
I struggled with an eating disorder in 7th grade, which inspired me to create the Normal Is Overrated program during my junior year of high school. It helps kids like me share their stories so other kids can feel less alone and learn about resources that can help. I couldn't have done it without Kids Minds Matter.
Because of the support that Kids Minds Matter provides, platforms like those given to Carly empower young people to take ownership of their mental health and seek help for their challenges.
Which is why we ask you
to send a strong message,
loud and clear,
to the children of Southwest Florida,
that we're in this together.
Kids Minds Matter.
Our next speaker is Maeve. Maeve is a bubbly and wonderful girl. She immediately stood out in the interviewing process, showing her passionate desire to be part of this group. Today, she will talk about the stigma surrounding her autism and her story about her diagnosis. Please welcome Maeve to the stand.
When I was a kid, I always knew I was different. An example being, I was obsessed with cats. Whenever someone would mention anything about their cat or cats in general, I would freak out with happiness and squeal about how much I loved them. I would pretend to be one, to the point where I would frequently tell people that I was part cat, or that I was a cat in my past life. Even making connections to the sci-fi show Doctor Who by saying that I had regenerated into a human from a cat, just like the main character of that show regenerates into different people. Yes, kids have phases, but they usually only last for a couple of months, maybe even a year. But 5 years is completely out of the question. Not for me. That was how long it lasted, until I eventually grew out of it in 7th grade in favor of rock music. Another thing I did was that I had to wear a certain thing every day. Pink was my favorite color, so I always had to be wearing it. I hated wearing pants and shorts, so I always had to be wearing a skirt. Later on, I developed an affinity for jewelry, and if I wasn't wearing 2 necklaces every day and a dozen bracelets, I would just about lose my mind. The jewelry stayed to this day, but the pink later changed to black and the skirts changed to skinny jeans. The thing is, my mom, who I've always lived alone with, didn't have any explanation for my obsessive behavior. Sure, when I first started school, she noticed that I had trouble paying attention to schoolwork, and I received an ADD diagnosis, attention deficit disorder. But that certainly didn't address the obsessiveness over certain things that I've had my whole life. My phases came and went, usually lasting half a year to a year. My first one since the cats was the show I mentioned, Doctor Who. Then it was 2 YouTubers called Dan and Phil. After that came a band called 21 Pilots, then another band called My Chemical Romance, who are still my favorite band to this day. When it came to MCR, I obsessed almost as much as I did with cats. The entirety of my 8th grade year was spent listening to them whenever I could, thinking about them almost always, writing stories about them, drawing them, even forcing my friends to listen to them. They inspired me so much, and thinking about them and immersing myself in their universe gave me an amazing feeling that I can only describe as euphoria. The shining colors, the soaring guitar riffs, the gut-wrenching vocals, all of it. Listening to them, knowing them, loving them, almost gave me a sense of purpose for the first time. I wanted to be like them. Around that same time, I started getting a strange feeling. It was the exact opposite of the euphoria that I felt. It was dark, empty, and numb. A dead forest surrounding my mind, with only faint phantoms of thoughts invading it. I later learned that it was called depression. I would have this feeling on certain days, and on those depressive days, I would feel nothing at all. It was, and still is, completely dark, numb, and hopeless. I wanted nothing but to be out of my own head, but I couldn't bring myself to move. There was another thing, too. It was like the euphoria in a way, in which my heart wouldn't stop racing and my mind was filled with thoughts, but instead of the thoughts being of raging neon and unapologetic individualism, it was filled with unquellable fear and hyper-self-awareness that I later learned was called anxiety. It came whenever I was alone in a crowd of people, or when my mom asked me to go into a gas station and buy something for her, or when my family brought new people over and I had to talk to them. My mom, and at this point my stepdad, noticed this and decided to bring me to a psychologist to get me a better diagnosis for all of it. I feared the worst, and I prayed to my new gods of rock that I would be okay. Finally, we found out my real situation. I have Asperger's syndrome, autism. All of those obsessions that I'd had over the years, those were called special interests. The reason I never paid attention to my schoolwork, it was simply unimportant to me, and since I didn't see the reason I had to do it, I just didn't do it. The reason I always had to wear certain things as a kid, and I still do now, when I get used to something, it always has to be there, no matter what it is. Suddenly, everything made sense. It was like the last puzzle piece of my world had finally been put in, and I could clearly see why I did the things I did. But then I realized something, and all of the puzzle pieces began to crumble again. When I was younger, and even then, I always wanted to fit in. When I saw other girls doing something, I would do it too in the hopes that they would want to be friends with me. The reason I had listened to My Chemical Romance in the first place was because a lot of others were listening to them as well, so I did it in the hopes that maybe I could be better friends with them. But now I knew that I would never fit in with anyone, no matter how hard I tried. My brain was simply wired differently, and I would never understand anyone else, and they would never fully understand me. There was only one person I could think to consult about this. For the sake of privacy, we'll call him Sam. Sam had been a friend of mine since 7th grade. At the time, I loved playing a video game called Minecraft, and so did he, so we bonded over that. But the thing was, he had autism, and for him it was a special interest. He would always want to talk about it, and I found this a bit strange. The thing was, his autism was far more prominent than mine, and he would take some of my traits, the special interests, the depression, the strict habits, to the extreme sometimes. He sometimes had outbursts, and this made him the butt of many people's jokes and bullying. But other than that, he was a really nice kid, and I valued him just as much as any other friend, and never hesitated to defend him when I could. When I realized that what had been happening to me and to him was the same, I finally knew that I wasn't alone. He was the first person that I told about it, and we became even better friends. I felt that I could understand him a lot better now, and I really could. He and I still talk sometimes, even though I moved away from where he is. I had a much luckier time with telling people about this than a lot of people did. Whenever I told them, they just seemed to accept it and treat me as normal. Sure, there were a few a-holes who decided not to talk to me after that, but I had a few people who I knew I could confide in to the end. As I moved to high school, I realized that I didn't have to fit in anymore. I started wearing bright colors again, and I started loving things that my friends didn't, and I started expanding my comfort zone. And with the help of therapy, medication, and the support of my family and friends, my depression and anxiety started to fall to the back burner. I discovered my passion for writing, I started to learn to draw, and I found my voice. I had finally grown into myself. Moving to Southwest Florida from Central definitely set me back a bit. I lost a few important people to me, and I started having depressive weeks rather than days. But you know what? I made it through. Here I am, stronger than I ever have been because of it. For all of the kids and adults out there who are experiencing the same things I did, no matter what you're going through, if it's having autism in any of its forms, if it's struggling with depression, if it's not fitting in, I'll tell you the one thing I needed to hear my whole life. You are important. You mean so much to this world. There are people who care about you. You will get through it. If you need help, seek it. If not from a professional, then from your family or friends. No matter what your passion is, no matter what your age, race, gender, sexuality, you are human. You have endless value. You are so important, and you will survive. Thank you for listening. And now, from a word from our sponsor.
Hi, I'm Gary Griffin, President of BNI Contractors, and we are proud to support the Normal is Overrated program as we continue our partnership with Healthy Lee and their goal to improve the behavioral health and well-being of our youth here in Southwest Florida.
now like to introduce you to Domini. Domini is a junior at Fort Myers High School. Today, Domini will be sharing about her struggle with depression and her experiences as an adopted child. Domini's interview immediately stood out to me because she was so ready and enthusiastic to share her story if it could help others, and it can. It has been such a pleasure having Domini on the Normal is Overrated team, and I am so honored to invite this outstanding individual to the podium. Domini?
Let me start by telling you a little bit about myself. As Ellie said, I'm 16-year-old and I go to Fort Myers High School and I'll be a junior this year. I was adopted at 4.5 years old and I'm an extroverted teenager. I love to paint, journal, and draw. Those are my coping skills, but we'll get to that later. I also love animals and I volunteer with an organization called Rescue Animals in Need, also known as RAIN. I live with my mom and dog and my extended family lives in India. But enough about me. Why am I not good enough? Why am I not normal? I used to ask myself this all the time, but I spent so long questioning myself, I never got the chance to really figure it out. I used to wonder why I couldn't be enough for anyone. I always had to be someone better, smarter, braver, stronger. But in life, there's always going to be someone better, smarter, braver, stronger. Now, I'm going to talk about the big scary D word, the word that we talk behind hushed voices and closed doors. That word, you guessed it, it's depression. My depression started in 8th grade, or at least that's when I recognized what it was. I felt lost, lonely, and sad 24/7. Although my grades were good, I had no motivation. I heard about how people hurt themselves to cope with depression, and I tried it, and it's been working for me, but it's not a good coping skill. I would happily stop existing when I went into my freshman year. When I went into my freshman year, my grades went down. I can't stop cutting, and it's been a bad habit of mine. When I felt numb, I would cut. I just didn't care enough. I've been so misunderstood, not just me, depression is misunderstood. Depression is a mood disorder that causes persistent feeling of sadness and loss of interest. I've dealt with it myself and I battle by myself, but no one hears you until you're loud, and then they will call you crazy. Hiding in the bathroom, wearing long sleeve shirts, scared of what I might do. I've been told to take a walk, breathe in, count to 10, but those don't work for me. What works for me may not work for you. What has worked for me is journaling and painting. Those are my favorite things to do when I feel down or at loss. Depression likes to kick you on the ground. Depression likes it when you're down. But up till now, I've never made a sound. Constant search for approval and I'm being suffocated by refusal. I'm tired of all these negative thoughts, always thinking of my imperfections, losing my mind over criticism and comparing my life to others. My life is spiraling down. I get these toxic thoughts and I don't know how to control them. These may also be called intrusive thoughts. But I'm an overachiever, so I have to break down everything, evaluate everything in life, but it's a parasite in my mind. Don't I deserve to be all right, and don't I deserve to sleep at night? I think why I haven't told the complete truth to anyone is because I'm scared of being deserted, and being deserted is the scariest thing for me. I'm trying my best, and I'm trying my best to be okay. I've been high and I've been low. Feelings come, but they won't go. I'm losing my mind. And I used to think, am I broken? Am I flawed? I felt like a lost cause. I didn't feel like a human. I felt like something else. I'm so scared because there's no one there for me. But the best thing I could say here is you need to find a support system. It could be a parent, close friend, or a trusting adult who will help you when you feel down or lost. Adoption. I was abandoned on the streets in India at 1 week old. Now, if you've never been to India, think of it like New York. The population is crazy over there. It's 10 times the population as New York. The only thing I do not really remember being adopted because I was only 4 years old, but my mom told me that I wouldn't talk. The only thing I would do is stare at my mom when I had to go pee, and I'd do this funny little dance. Kids who are adopted have this disorder called reactive attachment disorder, also known as RAD. RAD is a condition which an infant or young child does not form a secure, healthy emotional bond with his primary caretakers or parental figures. Children with RAD often have trouble managing their emotions. They struggle to form meaningful connections with other people. So basically saying that I've never been able to connect with my mom in a way where I feel close or attached to her. And honestly, it sucks. RAD is really hard to deal with for the parent and the child. It's hard to work through those challenges and form those relationships. It's a long process, and it may take a lifetime. Who knows? If I was not adopted, I would still be in the orphanage. Would I even had a chance to form these relationships or in a family? School. In middle school, I was bullied for my race and stereotype as an Asian. Good grades were frowned upon, and I was called a nerd and a teacher's pet. Why do we compare things, I used to wonder? Comparing grades, styles, and trends, because comparing grades and objects and materials has always let me down. My principal never believed me when I told him I was getting hurt. I was always looked at the bad kid and insubordinate child. As you can tell, school wasn't easy for me. I was never the book smart type of person. I was always the street smart type, but I always managed to try to keep my grades up. I remember in my sophomore year, my teachers would get mad at me because I wouldn't turn in my homework or I would come late to class. But I had so much anxiety built up from this, I could not turn in my homework or come to class. So I had to try really hard to come to class. The students in school would always think I'm skipping class or I just didn't want to turn in my homework, but it's better than them knowing the real truth why I couldn't. I have to talk to the social worker and guidance counselors at least 3 times a week to calm me down from my anxiety. My mental stress causes my depression. My depression is what causes me not to go to school. My depression can get so bad where I would get suicidal thoughts and thoughts of self-harm, and these bad thoughts can cause eating disorders. I just wish kids could be nicer and teachers could be more understanding. Teachers should be taught how to be empathetic and sympathetic to every student, no matter what they're going through, thick or thin. Most kids are also caught up in their own life. They don't have time to truly see around them and see what's going on in this world. I have missed over 25 days of school and over 63 class periods. I would have to make things up and tell kids why I miss so many schools, so many periods, so they wouldn't think I'm some psycho and weirdo. Kids have already called me a freak many times in school. I sort of get used to it, but it really hurts. My friends don't seem to hear me but they're always in their own world. Someday I'll find a place in this world. Normal. What is normal? Normal is conforming to a standard, usual, typical, or expected. What my normal looks like in my day-to-day life is sleeping, school, eating, walking my dog, homework, sleeping again. Normal is always changing. It's not static. Today, an emotional or behavioral state can be understood both as a disorder and a unique perspective. Learning experience. The thing I've learned from this is that you do not have to pretend like you are happy, so others will think you're normal. Another thing, it's okay to be okay. You do not have to be happy, as I said again. I am me and you are you. Accept yourself before accepting others. You need to learn to love yourself before loving the others, and it is hard, especially for people who struggle with insecurities. But accepting yourself is one of the most vulnerable things you can do. I'm not here to give you lectures. I'm giving you my best teenage advice. Thank you. Now we will have a brief 5-minute intermission. And stay tuned for our next speaker, Dory. Thank you.
Hello. For our last speaker, we have Dory Bendetowitz, who is a senior at Fort Myers High School, but dual enrolled at FGCU. She'll be talking about anxiety, depression, bullying, and seeking support and treatment, as this can be very difficult for high schoolers. So I'd like to welcome Dory to the stage.
Hi, my name is Dory, and I'm about to make a really personal story very public. So here we go. There are some days you will never forget. Sometimes there are super important moments, like graduation, for example, and other times these moments don't really mean anything to anyone else. The story starts with one of those moments that doesn't really matter to anyone else but you. It was a day 7 years ago at the Ringling Brothers Museum when my family and I were on vacation. We were about to go on a tour of a house on the grounds, and my dad decided he had to go to the restroom. For most people, that would be nothing. But for me, that was the end of the world. I started yelling at him because I was so sure we were going to miss the tour, and that was the worst thing imaginable. This moment, although sounding like nothing at the surface, was an unforgettable moment because this is when my mom looked at my dad and they realized it was time for me to be on medications. I was already in therapy, and this was just the next logical step. I was an anxious kid who would clean for fun because my OCD was so bad. You knew something was wrong when I organized something I had just cleaned the day before. For me, this signified the beginning of a journey that would take me through the rest of my life. My most significant experience with mental health on this journey in life started when I was 14 years old. I was in 8th grade, and I felt like queen of the world. I was in the oldest grade in middle school. I had a great group of friends and was ready for anything coming my way. At least I thought. Things can change in an instant, and I learned that the hard way. I remember the day it all came crashing down. I had a best friend who was new to school. She had come to school that year and was in my class. We became very close very quickly, and we were practically inseparable. That was until we had a fight. I couldn't even tell you what the fight was about, but I do remember it was bad. We yelled at each other and were people we couldn't even recognize. Suffice it to say that friendship ended rather quickly after that. Well, my friend group then decided that they had had enough of me because they wouldn't talk to me, and I had to move to the other friend group in my class. Everything was perfect until one day it wasn't. I came into school and went into my first period, which was gym. I went to sit in my spot when I realized no one was talking to me. I asked someone what was going on, and she told me that someone had written a page essay about everything that was bad about me. I saw a picture of it and realized everything I had carefully built was over. My new friend group now hated me as well. Everything moved rather quickly after that. I tried to talk with these people and reason with them to understand why they all of a sudden didn't like me. Well, I didn't get anywhere with that. To this day, I still don't know what happened or why these people disliked me so much so quickly. I have a few theories, but no real answers. So I did the only thing I could really think of after talking to my parents about it. We went to the guidance counselor and told her about the situation. Unfortunately, this guidance counselor, as nice as she was, didn't handle the situation in the most nuanced or useful way. This means that things only got worse from there because these girls got even more aggravated and decided to retaliate. Eventually, it got so bad that I couldn't even be in class, and there was nothing any adult could do. So what I would do is go to class, check in with my teacher, and then leave and go sit in the guidance counselor's office. I actually ended up finishing 8th grade 3 days early because all I did was sit in the guidance office alone and do schoolwork all day. My last official day as I was driving away, leaving school and driving away, and I don't know how it started, but I do remember I began sobbing. It was a release from all the days of pain I had suffered, sitting alone, knowing that all the people I cared about so much didn't care what happened to me or if they ever saw me again. I cried for about 30 minutes, and honestly, I still remember how that felt. I decided from that day I would let that experience go and move on. What I didn't know is that sadness and that trauma would not let go of me, and in fact, it would have a hold on me for quite some time. What I didn't know is that a switch went off in my brain for an irrational thought that said, well, if my bullies are going to be mean, everyone is going to be mean. Fortunately for my situation, these people and I went to 2 different high schools, and so far, I have not run into a single one of them since I left middle school. So I started my time at Fort Myers High School, ready for a fresh start and new people to meet. My freshman year was mostly uneventful until the end, when I missed about a month of school, and for no apparent reason. I just couldn't make it to school some days, and I wouldn't understand why that was until my sophomore year. Fast forward to the beginning of my sophomore year. Again, a new beginning with my same nice friends who made me feel good about myself. The beginning of sophomore year started like any other year, getting to know my teachers and classes and finding out which friends you would have lunch with. I remember when the signs that something was wrong became too hard to miss. I had always been a good student, driven, prepared, curious. I was in my AP World History class, and I had been doing really well in that class, and everyone, for some reason, thought I was just the most talented student at AP World History. Some of the class got together and made a study group, and I was the leader, making study sheets. Everyone was nervous about the first test, but we took it. We got our grades back, and I looked in horror. For the first time in my life, I had failed a test, and not just kind of done poorly, but actually got a 69, a D. I immediately pulled out my phone and texted my mom. I said to her that I'd failed. She assured me that I hadn't, and that's when I told her what I got. She was trying to be kind and supportive and told me to ask the teacher and see what had happened. That was one of the worst feelings in the world, not only because I had failed, but also because everyone around me was so sure I wasn't showing them my paper because I had gotten 100 and I didn't want to make them feel embarrassed. But that was my truth. I was a perfectionist pretending to be perfect, making sure everyone believed it even when I knew I wasn't. I had put myself through hell and back to make sure everyone knew I was perfect. But that wasn't the truth, and the toll it took on me to be perfect was tremendous. I've now learned that embracing my imperfections makes me truly happy, and that is who I want to be. I now don't expect myself to do everything right because I know that isn't possible, and I should be focusing on more important things than what people think of me and how perfect I pretend to be. The test was mostly the last sign that things weren't going too well in Dory's world, because then it was time for Thanksgiving break. After break, I didn't go back to school for 4 months. People I knew started to get worried about me. One evening, a friend of mine texted me and said she wanted to come over. I knew she was coming over to check on me, but she didn't say that, and I let her come over anyway. Her and her brother showed up, and I put on the persona of feeling fine, which must have just confused them more. We didn't talk about the fact that I wasn't in school. We just kind of visited as if everything was fine. They probably left that night asking themselves, what is going on with Dory? I started not being able to get out of bed. At first, I didn't understand what was going on. My parents just assumed I was lazy or apathetic, but nobody was able to put the pieces together for a while. At this point, I'd been in therapy for 8 years with my current therapist, and I had a psychiatrist on the team as well. One day, we all realized what was going on. I couldn't get out of bed. I didn't go to school, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. I physically couldn't get out of bed because emotionally, I couldn't get out of my own head and my own thoughts. I was having panic attacks on the regular, but there was one in particular that sticks out in my head. I remember it so vividly. I remember what pants I was wearing. I was wearing plaid pants, for those who care, and my mom came in and told me we had to leave for an appointment. I started having a panic attack, and my parents realized there was no going to any appointment. But the reason this panic attack sticks out in my head is the reason I had it. I had it because I didn't have it because I didn't want to go to an appointment, but it was more than that. The truth was, I was so ashamed of who I'd become and what I was that I didn't want to leave my room, and I didn't want anyone to see me. I will never, ever take that feeling of loving yourself for granted because there was a time when I didn't, and I will never, ever forget that feeling of shame. I then tried to convince my parents I didn't need all that treatment stuff, and I was going to show them that I could go back to school. Yeah, right. We were trying to solve the problem using outpatient care, but soon it became clear that that wasn't going to be enough to solve the severity of my problems. My medicine was failing me, and my therapy was not going to be enough to save my sinking boat. I was also not safe to be home alone for fear that I would do something stupid because I couldn't trust myself. Also, I was sleeping on an air mattress in my parents' room because at that point I didn't have the ability to sleep alone in my own room. Treatment had been something that had been floated as an idea, but it didn't become my reality, so I went to my therapist and there were 2 folders in front of me, one for each facility. My therapist said she had talked to my psychiatrist, and at this point there was nothing they could do that was going to help me enough, so they were suggesting treatment. At this point, I would have tried anything to feel some relief, to feel something other than sadness. So that night at dinner, my family and I sat together and talked about this idea. There really wasn't much to talk about since we didn't have any other real options. So it was decided I would be going to treatment really soon. The details were soon to iron out, which meant I would be going to a partial hospital patient program, and that unfortunately my brother and dad would be left behind at home because this facility we chose was in Orlando. When being a partial hospital patient, that means you must go home at the end of every day. Commuting from Orlando back to Fort Myers every single day wasn't viable, so our next option was to find somewhere to stay. This is kind of where the story comes full circle. What I didn't tell you before is that at Thanksgiving break, I was in Orlando visiting family. So I was lucky enough to have it all work out. My family let my mom and I stay with them, and it was barely 10 minutes from the facility. I probably don't need to remind you that not everyone is that lucky. So after a couple goodbyes to my brother and dad, it was time to head to treatment. We drove up to the facility, and once we got there, it was time for intake. The facility was a couple of older brick buildings on a smaller road in Winter Park. I went in, and they asked us to fill out a bunch of forms and answer many questions, among other things. During my intake, I had to meet with a therapist and a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist was a nice man who asked me many questions, but he asked me if I thought things changed. I said for the most part no, and he answered me saying things change all the time. I don't think I agree with him that everything is always changing, because to this day, I still wish I could have asked him how often, if ever, he has changed the furniture around in his office. I would be starting on Monday, and I was expected to be there at 8 a.m. in dress code, which was a blue-collared shirt and khaki pants. I was ready for treatment. Or so I thought. My first full experience of treatment is still one of the most traumatic things I have experienced up until this point. So I showed up ready for class and treatment, and we met up with the principal of the school. She showed us around the facility, and at the end we got to the unit where the rest of the girls were lined up and ready to go to breakfast, also in dress code. I was searched on my person to make sure I didn't have anything dangerous to myself or anyone around me, since I was coming from the outside every day. This was kind of a wake-up call for me about the realness of the world and the type of people that came to a facility like this, people who could be a danger to themselves and the people around them. I decided I was not like that I was not sick enough to be in a facility like this, and I didn't deserve what was happening to me. Towards the end of the day, I felt a sob that I wouldn't let escape forming. I waited till my mom picked me up, and as soon as the door closed from the facility, I sobbed like I've never cried before. I told her that it was too much for me, that I wasn't that sick, and this wasn't a good thing for me. She listened to me and said we should go to the intake office and talk to the director of the clinic. Well, she wasn't available at the time, so we went back to my aunt's house, and she called us later that night. The director of the clinic told my mom the truth, that if I didn't need to be there, I wouldn't have been admitted. So my mom got off the phone, looked at me, and said I was going to have to go back there tomorrow. I started arguing with her because I did not want to go back, but somehow she won that argument, and I went back the next day. Thank goodness I went back, because if I didn't, I don't know that I'd be here today. I really owe so many things to that experience. I remember another traumatic event at treatment. I was still very new to the whole idea, and I don't know how it started, but I began to cry, and I almost had a panic attack in the middle of class. They immediately took me back to the unit to calm me down, but I couldn't say why I was so upset through the sobs. The attendant on the unit handed me a piece of paper and a red marker and said to me, "Write down what you're feeling." It was like magic. As soon as I finished putting my feelings to the paper, I wasn't crying anymore. I had a moment of realization where I felt like, whoa, I'm not crying anymore. And honestly, the only thing that knew what I was crying about was the piece of paper that had my feelings on it. So I looked down at the paper and read it. I immediately realized what was the matter. I was afraid at the end of the day my mom wasn't going to come pick me up. My therapist wasn't available that day, so I talked about it with a woman on the unit and eventually made it back to class in one piece. At the end of the day, when my mom came to pick me up, I asked her, "Are you always going to pick me up?" She looked at me and said one of the hardest things I've ever had to hear. She looked at me and said, "I'm going to do what's best for you. If that means putting you in full-time treatment and you living at the facility, then I will do it. But for now, yes, I will pick you up every day." And for those of you who are wondering, I stayed in the partial hospital patient program my entire tenure at treatment, which meant that yes, every day my mom came and picked me up. One of the things I had to deal with in treatment was the irrational thought process I had been having during this entire time that I addressed earlier. I remember being with my therapist during an individual session and crying because that experience of bullying still had a hold on me. So we talked it out and figured out my next step, which would be calling some of my friends and telling them vaguely what was going on, just so I could let them in a little bit. So that evening, I FaceTimed maybe 5 to 8 friends and said to them, "I'm going through something, but I'm getting help and I'm going to be okay." They were all so kind and caring. I worked through a lot of trauma and personal issues at treatment. Well, we got in a bit of routine, my family and me. I would go to treatment during the day, and after treatment, we would get ice cream or sometimes walk around the town or just go home and hang out. Slowly, I was starting to get better. I was not reverting to my old self, however. I was breaking out of a shell I had placed on myself and become a new, better person. So eventually, it was time for me to go. I had done all the work I needed to do at treatment, and it was time for me to go out into the real world and live my life. So I left after being there exactly 1 month. I drove away for the last time, saying goodbye to my old self, saying goodbye to the life I had made there with my aunt, uncle, cousin, and mom, and going back to my previous life. Remember that brother and sister who came over to check on me before treatment? Well, a couple days after I got home, I saw them, and we both kind of acted as if nothing had happened. To this day, these are still some of the best people I know because they knew I was lying straight to their face about being okay, and they never once asked for an apology. But I still do appreciate everything they did for me during this experience. Later that year, I would get into FGCU's ACE program and start my college career early. I also ended up with incredible grades for the year I was in treatment. So a question I get a lot is, do you regret everything that happened to you? And my answer is absolutely not. I wouldn't be the person I am today without it. Thank you.
So now you've officially heard from all 4 of our speakers who did an amazing job. So we just kind of want to take some time to thank the speakers today for opening up about such personal stories, because we know it's not easy and we know it's really scary to stand up here and just look into this camera and know people are watching you. So thank you so much for sharing your stories today.
Exactly. You guys have come so far since our interview process. These 4 were some of the most eligible that came through the process. Not to say that none of the others weren't, but to see that your passion and your willingness to stand up here and share your stories, especially to reduce the stigma that each of you have faced. Especially you've talked about going through treatment, Dory, Cole's journey. Every single journey was impactful. And to get up here and share with the world, the 76 people, I know that number because I was in charge of all the attendees, watching you and impact their lives to not only inspire them to become aware of the stigma surrounding mental illness. Just know that your stories have had an impact. And I know all these people in the audience have felt it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you guys have definitely come a long way since we first interviewed you. And I know it's definitely difficult to tell all your most personal stories in front of all these people in the room today, and then also all the people online that you guys probably don't even know. So I know that it's, that's a big step, and I'm proud of how brave you guys all are and how close you guys have gotten, as a group. And I'm just really happy with how it all turned out. And I thank you guys for that.
Yes, so you guys have helped so many people in your community, but not just the community. There are people here from around the country, which is amazing. So I think we're going to take a short break, and then we will go into our Q&A. But before that, last year at the event that was in person, they had therapy dogs. And unfortunately, we cannot bring those to you today, but we do have a video to play before the Q&A so you can see some of those therapy dogs and the good that they are doing for people. So enjoy.
He's so abnormal. He's too big, he's too furry, his tail curls. He's not a normal German Shepherd, yet he's 100% German Shepherd. So normal is overrated is his slogan.
I always tell people that I can teach my dog how to be well behaved, but I cannot teach her how to be compassionate or empathetic. She just knows how to do that.
I had no idea I wanted to be a therapy dog team partner, but it's all he's ever wanted to be. He's just always loved people. I bottle raised him from 3 days old, and he loves people. He goes to anybody. He's just the sweetest, kindest guy. I'm real proud of him.
Got it? Good girl.
Beasley's Paw Prints Pet Therapy through CAC, Children's Advocacy Center, is funded totally by a wonderful woman by the name of Carol Beasley through the United Way. We have roughly 40 dogs and handlers that we use through the program, not only for therapy here in the building, but also for outlying places like PACE, Salvation Army, Salis Care. When the children come to us for therapy, we will employ the dogs with a certain child during a therapy session. The dogs are able to interact with the child as the dog sees fit. And they are a comfort, they are non-judgmental, they really give that child the confidence to face the challenges that they've gone through.
I think it's invaluable. I mean, honestly, I've watched just sometimes their presence, like just walking into the room, or that they know walking into the building, or getting out of the car in the parking lot, and they see these dogs, that they know that there's going to be a non-judgmental entity in the room with them, and I think that that's important.
Aside from doing therapy work in-house with children and the outlying areas, is we have a select few therapy dogs that are allowed to go to the courthouse, the 20th Judicial Circuit, not only here in Lee County, but also in Charlotte County. And they are there to help children and even adults who are maybe testifying in court against their abuser.
It's an exceptional thing to do, and people's response to the dogs is just over the top.
Therapy dogs are an incredible resource for people, young and old, who need that extra comfort in order to face something that is traumatic, or if they're in a situation that they're not comfortable in. The dogs provide that unconditional love. They listen, and they're there to help take that emotion and give a smile.
We're here at the Children's Advocacy Center, 2 children and a mother, brother and a sister, and the sister was like 3, maybe 4, and they didn't speak English. She wouldn't go in with the counselor without the mom. Fancy is very food motivated. This dog will drive a car for food. And so her and this little girl bonded over these little cheese balls. And so the second time we were here, I gave her Fancy's leash. She walked her to the door and then let go of the leash. The third time, the leash went all the way with her to the room. The fourth time, the mom didn't come because she walked in with Fancy. And sometimes I just cry because it was just really special to see that, because she didn't speak English, so she didn't talk to Fancy at all. Fancy could sense when she was getting upset, so that was pretty special.
The people that love him really love him. He met a little girl in Virginia 2 years ago that is dyslexic, and she wanted to read to him. And we're still best friends. She calls him and talks to him on the telephone and does FaceTime with him so she can read to him, and sends him birthday cards and gets him presents. And it's an interesting bonding to have just met on the street. But he's just her best friend.
The program would not exist without the United Way and Carol Beasley. It's extremely important that we continue to grow this program so that we can reach more children and adults that need the special comfort that these dogs give.
Welcome back, everyone. Now we will be beginning our Q&A portion of this event. The Q&A portion will allow the audience, to ask questions to not only our speakers, but also our professionals that are with us here today. Now, if you have a question that's directed to specifically one of our speakers, please in the Q&A box put their name next to your question so we know which question it will be going towards.
Hi everyone, I'm Domini. If you have any questions, please put in the Q&A box. I will be answering questions about mental health or my speech in general.
Hi, I'm Cole Yates. You guys heard my speech earlier about my journey. If you have any questions for me, please do the same, and I would love to answer.
Hi, my name is Dory, and you heard me speak, and if you have any questions, let me know.
Hi, my name is Maeve, and I would be happy to answer any of your questions, so please ask them. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Paul Simeone here, VP Medical Director for Behavioral Health, and I'm happy to answer any questions or comment on anything that you'd like to talk about. So let's have a good conversation. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Tashara, folks. I am a medical social worker with Lee Health. I'm also a pre-licensed therapist in the community specializing in maternal mental health, and I'm super excited to be here amongst my colleagues and these wonderful students, speakers. So I'm excited for the panel discussion this morning. Thank you.
And hello, my name is Sherry Wenzel. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm the coordinator for mental health services with Lee County Schools. I just want to tell these students how proud I am that they are here today, and it really touched my heart with their stories, and I appreciate it very much. I appreciate all of you. Thank you.
Yes.
So our first question is for Cole. And the question is, do you have any advice for students dealing with similar feelings related to accepting themselves?
Alrighty, so do I have any advice? Well, yes.
So just keep it down
Yeah,
to
green light's good.
Oh, green light's good. Okay. Sorry about that. Anyways, so basically, if I have any advice, this is gonna sound very stupid, but you don't give it too much thought. Like I said in my speech, you are who you are and never be ashamed of that. And it takes time to get there, but you will get there no matter if you aren't okay with who you are right now or if you're struggling with, your sexuality, as did I. It really takes time. And I think you have to hone in on that key element of that to understand that you're not just going to understand who you are in an instance, as well as family and friends. It takes time for everyone. And I don't know if it really should or if it will in the future, but at this point, it's just really important to understand that time is a virtue in that type of situation. So.
The next question is for Dory. This says, the way you were bullied at school had to be incredibly difficult for you. What could your school, and especially the school counselor, have done differently to handle the bullying situation so it would not have gotten worse and instead could have been resolved?
That's a great question. I think teachers and faculty in general just need to be more aware of the situation and how kids in general behave, because bringing a bunch of kids into a room and scolding them for something that they were told on is not very helpful. So maybe just finding a way to be more nuanced about the situation and try to just make it more clear that there are consequences to your actions.
Thanks, Dory. The next question is for any of the students today. Oh, it's just a comment. Sorry, read that wrong. But they said you're brave and thank you for sharing your experiences. Sorry, that was in the Q&A section, so I was a little confused. Yes. So the next question says, Domini, did you find any comfort with any of the teachers at your high school?
There was a couple of teachers I had that were really like empathetic and sympathetic towards me. Some of my teachers have really gone above and beyond to helping me and to feel more comfortable in my school. Other than that, there's some teachers who they don't really know what's going on through school. So I wish teachers could just try to look into deeper. But other than that, yeah.
Thanks, Domini. The next question, which is for anybody over there. How do you know when you're just feeling stressed by everyday life versus needing to seek professional help?
So, one thing this is a great question because I really struggle with this as well. I have a lot of anxiety and I would get very stressed about tests, quizzes, anything that would put me on the spot or I had to study for it or it was going to test my intelligence or test me in any type of way. It was really difficult for me, but I knew it was a problem. That's being stressed out every day. That's being stressed out about certain situations, but I knew it was a problem when it started to control my everyday life. And when I started to rethink like everything that I was doing and rethink those situations and really like not, I just started to feel it was a difficult process because like I just started to feel really bad every single day. It was a consistent thing. It wasn't just something that was happening here and there. And it was just like kind of immobilizing for me as well.
Thanks, Cole. The next question is for any of the professionals here. This says, I am in my 40s. When I was growing up, I don't remember hearing about mental health issues in teens. Now it's more in the forefront. Do you think mental issues in teens have increased in the past few years, or do you think the stigma has decreased, which has caused more to share their publicly?
Yeah. I don't know the statistics off the top of my head in regards to if it's more common now, but if I can make a professional guesstimate, I would say that it's not more common. I think we've just been more accepting of mental health, and we have more going on. Considering the climate we're in now, I also want to credit Gen Z. I feel like this generation is just doing it. They're movers and shakers. You guys are movers and shakers, right? And so my generation, and I'm, a little bit older than you guys, but I'm gonna put that out there.
Not too much.
Yeah, just, a couple years. Yeah. My generation, my parents and my grandparents' generation, we were not as accepting or as open to some of the things that this generation is. So I want to really just stop and credit your generation because you guys are doing amazing, amazing, amazing things. And I think that with you guys as the leaders in a lot of movements, the generation after you guys are going to be better off. And so I think right now we're seeing a more healthy community holistically. So I don't think that it's more mental health issues per se. I just think it's being exposed. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we are not prepared for it is being exposed, whether it's access to care. So a lot of you guys talked about a diagnosis and treatment. And so, and even with a diagnosis and treatment, still struggling. And so thinking about those individuals, those community members, those populations of people who don't have access to care, who are not identified, who don't have parental support, school support, who are not being heard, right? I think a common theme that we've heard is someone listened, whether that was a peer, a professional, a parent, someone listened at a certain time. And I know from me being in the field, a lot of our youth do not have people listening. They're speaking, they have the behaviors, and no one is listening. So that's how I feel about that.
Sherry, do you want to speak to this?
check out. You know, it's okay to have a mental health checkup. It's okay to say, you know what, mentally, emotionally, I'm not okay right now. Maybe I just need to talk to somebody. And you take that stigma away from people wanting to do that. Can you hear me? Okay. To take away that stigma of just being okay with just reaching out to somebody to say, hey, I could use a little additional support. And taking away the stigma of if you do get that additional support, you're crazy or there's something wrong with you. The stigma of all of that and just reaching out for support. So that's like my biggest thing is I think more people are being more okay with asking for a little additional support.
Yeah. I'd just like to make a few comments. First, I just want to echo Tashara's appreciation of your generation. My feeling about my generation, which is the baby boomer generation, without getting too far into the weeds, I think my generation dropped the ball in a number of ways, and you folks are courageously picking it up. And I can't say enough good things about your generation, especially, and it's what makes me the most optimistic about the future of the world is your generation and not mine. A couple of things about prevalence of mental health issues. We don't have good data on this. We don't know whether mental illness is more prevalent. The historian in me thinks that it is, partly because we have lots of cultural problems going on and world problems, not the least of which is really a disastrous climate change that we notice the fires out in the West Coast, which are unprecedented. We have really serious troubles there. The last thing I'll say is that what got my attention today, listening to all of you, is the courage and the tolerance. I'm particularly appreciative of the tolerance of your generation. One of the reasons why I feel so hopeful is that you are accepting and compassionate in a way that previous generations have not been. And I think that is going to be key to the survival of our species, frankly. That's what I believe real respect and diversity is about, is to appreciate the difference in all of us. And the reason why this is called Normal is Overrated is because normal is overrated. What we think about as normal is really a sort of socially constructed meaning, which is way too constrained. I mean, obviously, listening to all of these comments, you can tell that people live all sorts of different lives that are normal, and it's important for us to talk about that. So, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Next question is for Domini. What kind of practices can students use that may have helped you get over negative emotions that you felt?
There's a lot of things that you can try to help yourself if you get these negative emotions. So, these coping skills, my personal coping skills are journaling and painting. I love to paint and journal and draw. Other things that you can do is, let's say if you are getting this negative thoughts, you might want to see a counselor soon. You might want to talk it out to a trusting friend or a parent, because parents should really know what's going on in your head so they can help you. Or maybe a guidance counselor at school or a teacher that is trusting. Other things you can do is, I've been told running and exercising, it starts those endorphins. That can help a lot too.
For all of the speakers, what can your peers, especially in school, do to support you when you are struggling?
One of the things that I've noticed is that when someone is there to listen, they really make an impact on people's lives. It's just that, I guess, talking it out is one of the best coping mechanisms, at least for me. So one thing that my closest friends have done is just let me rant and just go on about how I'm feeling. And that's one of the things that professionals do as well, is they just let you say whatever you want. And I think that peers and people like that can really support you by listening and just giving you support for whatever you have to say.
I also want to say just being aware that like people are going through things and you don't know what they're going through. And so just being cognizant of like what you're saying and what you're doing and how it affects other people, because your actions always have consequences. The words you say have consequences, and the things you do matter, no matter who you are, who you're doing it to. So you need to be cognizant and aware of what you're doing and how it's affecting people, and just being kind, even if it's hard or even if you're having a bad day, just be kind.
The next question is for Dr. Simeone. Can you weigh in on how parents can keep an eye out for their children regarding some of the feelings that were discussed today?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, and I'm really glad to have it raised. I think about this less as a professional and more as a parent. I have a 29 and a 26-year-old, and what I think has been kind of most important and enlightening to me about having raised them with their mother is just to pay attention, to listen, as I think as Dory said, to make sure that you're plugged into their world and not to assume that you know what's going on and to superimpose your perspective on theirs, because they have a very valuable perspective of their own. There is no replacement for being connected to not just your children, but everyone in your family and in the community, because it's through those sorts of connections that we understand where people live, what they need and want, how we can be helpful, to be compassionate about their experience, to be accepting of their experience. So I see, having been a practicing psychologist for the last nearly 40 years, what I would say is that my experience has been that when parents and kids don't connect and there are problems, it's because people really aren't listening to one another and accepting reality for what it is. So I hope that's helpful. I think that's kind of how I think about it. So thanks again for raising the question.
Thank you. This is for any of the student panelists. Knowing what each of you knows after working through your own challenges, what would you say to a friend you notice may be struggling?
I'm here for you, 100%. It's, if you notice that they change or they're changing in real time, or if you can tell that there's something going on, don't try to superimpose yourself on the issues unless they would like to talk about those with you, but always let them know that you are there and that you're always there to talk if they do want to talk. There's a fine line between putting yourself in their lives and their situations and stuff like that, also determining how close of friends you guys are. But you just need to let them know that you are there for them in any circumstance, whenever they need it, because that will help so much.
Echoing off what Cole said, also just like the little things, like doing the little things and being there for the little moments when, even if they're having like a good moment or a bad moment, if it's a little thing, like be there and show them that like it's going to be okay. Like the little things are the most important, because the big things, like they're going to have a ton of people there hopefully, and they need the little moments to really, the in-between moments.
I'm also going to say another thing. One thing that one of my friends always say to me all the time, that when I'm going through things, I'm like, oh, this just seems so stupid. I don't know why. Your feelings are valid. Always valid. Never invalidate your situation. Never invalidate your journey. Never invalidate, your emotions, because that's how you're feeling, and you can't change that because, you just can't. So yeah, just don't do that. Yeah.
And I just want to, just to piggyback on what you said, Cole, I think it's also important in validating your feelings to recognize as well that we can't be somebody other than who we are. It's really, there are, I think I was talking with Cheryl about this at the break, about Facebook in particular. I'm a little bit of a Luddite. I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook or a lot of technology, but I think one of the problems with Facebook is that there's a way in which people present themselves as, kind of, super popular, super healthy, having a great time here and there, and, being in the popular crowd. And I don't think that that's helpful to a lot of people. I think that it creates way more trouble than it's worth. And I think it makes people feel like the life they're living is somehow not quite up to it. And what I want to say is it's your life, and it's important that you live it the way that you want to live it. So anyway.
I just want to say, carrying off of that social media thing and just in real life in general, just don't lie to yourself. Don't pretend that you're happy. It's okay to not be okay. And just be honest. Honestly, it just, if you don't, just find someone to talk to if you can. If you can't see a professional, then talk to your family or your friends, just anyone that you can trust, maybe even your school guidance counselor. Be honest with yourself and don't pretend that you're happy or don't pretend that you're having fun when you're not. Just be honest with everyone else and yourself.
If I can just add one thing, I think going back to like prior generations or generations, other generations and then your generation, I feel as though as a society, we are very uncomfortable with when people don't feel okay. If it's not happiness and joy, we're uncomfortable. If it's thoughts of like, I wonder what would life be if I wasn't here? Some of those thoughts that we all have at some point in life, we are so uncomfortable with it. But just going back to say, it is okay to not be okay. And then seeking out those arenas where you can kind of figure it out, whether it's through medication, through therapy, through peer support, whatever, through all of it, whatever it is. But I just want to let that sit. Like, it is okay to not be okay. And we'll figure it out together,
If I could just piggyback on there was a question that got asked early in the panel discussion about when do you know when to seek treatment, or how do you know when to seek treatment? I think that was directed to Cole. And what I want to say is this, that, usually people think about they need to become symptomatic. They need to have anxiety, depression, they have to have an eating disorder, they have to cut. And to me, that's too late, frankly. What I say to people is this, that if you're feeling uncomfortable and you feel like you can benefit from somebody else's perspective, whether it's a friend or a professional, then I would say find somebody to talk to that you can trust. And because the conversation is the most important thing. When I was practicing in Boston, I used to say to my patients on a routine basis, I'm not likely to tell you anything you haven't thought about or heard about. There's nothing revelatory that's going to come from our work. What's most important in our work is the conversation, that we gather in one another's best interest, that we're honest, that it's a safe space, and that people can explore things in a way that allows them to expand the universe of who they are. That's what's most important to all of us. And that's sometimes what I call the meaning project. We all have a meaning project, and we have to pursue it relentlessly. So I just want to say, don't wait till you become symptomatic. Just get the help that you need whenever you want it. That's really important.
I also want to piggyback and say, like, you are human, and being a human, you are going to experience things other than happiness, and that is so okay. Like, being upset or being uncomfortable, like, those are okay. Like, you are a human, and that's part of the human struggle. It's part of being on this earth is struggling, and that is okay, and it's totally acceptable. So just be okay with it and seek help if you need it, or be comfortable in knowing that you are not always going to be 100%, and that's okay.
Conversation. The next question is for the students. This says, for the teens that are approaching college, has your experience with mental illness affected how you think about your future? For example, would you want to stay local or move away, or have a career field related to mental health or healthcare?
Alrighty, I will. Oh, okay. All right. So, alrighty. So I definitely, like, when I heard this, I was like, okay. So I go to a fairly small school. Nothing wrong with that. Community is very small, so the inclusivity meter is quite low, and there's not a lot of people such as myself, and so I would love to go to a larger school, and also one of my top priority for my schools is just inclusivity. Like the amount of people there, I just want diversity, and I think that that's going to give me so much happiness no matter where I am. Like I don't know, like it could be in California, it could be here, but I just know that I need diversity because it's going to give me so much. It's going to give me confidence as well to like see everyone around me be so confident, and it really is going to push me to again move out of my comfort zone, because you are never done learning about yourself. So yes.
I'm also going to be going to college soon, and yes, it has definitely affected the way I think about my future, because I'm just like a completely different person than before I went through this experience. And so I'm thinking about, what is going to be the most beneficial for me? What is going to be the most beneficial for the people around me? And how do I do that and make sure that I'm happy and healthy? Because happiness overall to me is the most important. So it's just about, thinking about how am I going to be the most happy? Am I going to be the most happy in a big city, in a small city? What is going to make me the transition the easiest, like those kinds of thoughts, and just making sure that I'm keeping an eye on myself and, having other people keeping an eye on me to make sure that I'm not going down a path that is not the most beneficial to me or the people around me.
Personally, mental health has really affected how I think about my future, simply because, number one, I'm terrified of being alone. So going to a city far away from my family to go to school really scares me. So, of course, I'm going to stay local because of that, as well as the fact that I just want to be in a familiar environment. I want to be in a large school where I have more opportunities to make friends, and I also just want to have the support of my family and my friends nearby. And that is what has really affected my choices about my future.
This question is for the professionals. How much training in understanding mental health and illness and its impact on learning is given to teachers, especially high school teachers?
I'll go ahead and answer that. That's a really good question, because that's one of the things that the Lee County Schools has really tried to focus on, is that teacher training. We offer in-person training. We have also offered some really good online trainings for our teachers this year. And as my job as the coordinator of mental health services and our whole school counseling and mental health services department, we really focus on supporting our staff in any kind of questions they want specific training. We have training specifically on trauma. We have training on recognizing mental health in students. It's called Youth Mental Health First Aid. We are all trainers in that. We are in the process of training every teacher, every bus driver, every cafeteria worker that works within our district in recognizing what mental health looks like, or a mental health challenge looks like within our students, and also what to do with that. Like, okay, it's great. I think that the student might be struggling, but what do I do? And how do I get them to that maybe that person that they need to talk to, maybe that school counselor, maybe that school social worker, maybe that school psychologist that can really have that professional interaction with the student and determine if something else more may be needed. But our whole department is dedicated to mental health and the mental health of our students and our staff.
And could I just add, as somebody who's worked fairly closely with the schools, both in Lee County and Collier, and working particularly with Lori Brooks and Sherry Wenzel, who do a spectacular job, I've been super impressed with not just the amount of training and the quality of training, but how much kindness, compassion, and professionalism they've all shown. And it's been a delight working with all of you. And so thank you for everything you do.
Oh, thank you for that. And we enjoy our partnership. And I love listening to the students. I love listening to you guys, because you know what? I can't know everything. And you're the ones that are on the front line. So you're the ones that are experiencing it right now. And if we aren't here to support you, then we need to find something else to do.
I think I used to work with Lee Health's pediatric behavioral health. So I work directly with, school teachers and IEP meetings and just the whole team. And I think another thing that teachers and staff can do and have done in this area is that collaboration of care. And so I think the student is the expert. So yes, we're the professionals, but you guys are the experts. You've been with yourself your entire life. You know what's going on. And so teachers, bus drivers, whoever in the school can be key informants, you know, because they can see when there's a change. Like I've noticed, you know, Cole is a little different or whatever the case is. And so them working with social workers in the school and outside of the school, the psychologists, like everybody working together, because we are all eyes and ears, key informants in that care. So I think not only is it like the professional development and all of these different trainings and CEUs, but also knowing who is who in the school. So knowing that, you know, you can go to Lori, you know, or you can go to a school social worker and their role, or school psychologist, and knowing the student and the relationship that the student has with whoever's in the school. So it may not be the psychologist for, you know, this particular student, but for that student, it may be the social worker. And things like that. So I just really want to hone in on the idea of that community support and that care collaboration, because it takes everyone. It really does.
Thank you. The next question is for anybody. This is, do you have any advice for let me start over. Do you have any advice for parents if a child will not admit that there is something going on, but you sense that there is a problem?
I would say try to talk to your child as much as possible. And if not, if you think or feel that something is wrong with my child, there probably is, because kids don't really tend to open up to parents. But my personal situation, I never told my mom about this. She found out through other people. So I would talk to a school social worker or something to see if there's anything they can do, and see if the child will open up to them.
Well, it's all about making your child comfortable, right? So it's about making sure that they feel comfortable opening up and telling them, you know, it's going to be okay and we can figure this out, but we have to work together. And that's the idea, is like watching out for each other, because we're all just here together and we need to do this together.
Another thing is that you know your child on, you know, obviously surface level for sure. And you know what works well with them, obviously, like growing up. And if you sometimes, and I know it sounds bad, but you have to be sneaky about how you indirectly try to talk to them and make them feel comfortable in that sense. But sometimes they're the type of person that directly can be talked to and be like, look, like, you know, and it really takes like the understanding and the evaluation of your child to understand how you need to go about those situations. I don't feel like it's a cut and paste answer. It's really like how your child like reacts to certain situations, and you have to implement that into the way that you're going to take that situation on as well.
I just wanted to say, for parents, don't superimpose your mindset onto your child, because that can be really detrimental to that child's mental health, specifically for teens and kids, that kind of thing. So just make sure your child knows that you can be supportive of them and that you're always listening and you're always there for them.
And I just want to share too, just as a parent as well, you know, when you notice that your child is struggling, is that, you know, just being present, just being there. Sometimes it's just being in the same room, giving them the opportunity to open up. And I used to call it, even my son is 23 now, and he called it car therapy, because I'd be like, even now I'm like, do you want to go to the store with me? And he'll be like, oh no, you think something's going on because now you want to talk to me, Mom. You know what? As he grew up, because I did use that a lot, is like, you know, get in the car with me. There's not a whole lot going on in the car, but it is that importance of just as a parent being present for your child, or, you know, your child's friends, and just being, sometimes, like I said, it's just being in the same room.
Yeah, if I could just jump onto that. What I think, now I'm speaking as a parent and not as a clinical psychologist. I think that I have gotten into the greatest amount of trouble with my children when I have been in the most amount of trouble with myself. So I think what I mean to say about that is that I think as parents, when we watch our kids struggle, and all of our kids struggle, it makes us anxious. What's I think tricky about parenting is that you go through the same developmental hoops that your kids are going through, and if you didn't do such a good job the first time around, you do have another chance at it, but you get anxious and stressed as well. And so I think it's important for us to know our own hearts as parents so that we can keep our own stuff out of our kids' lives, particularly what gets in the way. And so my recommendation to parents is before you try to have a conversation with a child that's struggling, ask yourself some questions about where you are at that point, and to try to settle yourself down and try to be clear on what you're trying to do, and then and only then, begin to have that conversation with your kids. I've made the greatest number of mistakes by not doing what I just suggested. So anyway.
Yes, I've seen it time and time again. Parents, and I say this with all the love and care, don't project your own issues on your children, which we see all the time. I've had parents who refuse to take their children to therapy because I'm a good parent. And this means that I'm not a bad parent if I take them, or look what I did. I was able to deal with my depression. You'll be okay. We have that. And I do believe our parents genuinely love and care for their children, but sometimes they let their own stuff get in the way, and it really harms the child and that parent-child relationship. So I think that's key, is kind of figure out, is this my own stuff that is getting in the way? And does my child know that I'm going to support them? We've had students that there were things going on, whether it was bullying or they were having, thoughts of harming themselves or depressive symptoms, and they would try to go to their parent and their parent would never believe them. And so does your child know that, without a shadow of a doubt, that you're there for them? I think those are some questions that we have to ask as caregivers and parents.
And I just want to add on to that too, that yes, we need to put our own stuff aside, because also as parents, believe it or not, guys, we want to fix it for you. Just as hard as it is for you to go through the hard times that you go through, as a parent, it is so hard to watch you do it and not be able to fix it for you. So as a parent, you want to fix it and make it better. And as parents, it's our job to step back and support you through it. But just understand that no matter what we do, we can't fix it. We can support you and help you get through it yourself.
Another thing I would like to say is that I know that, the saying actions speak louder than words. I totally, agree with that. But one of the biggest things that, has really affected me is someone saying really vocalizing, my parents being I am always here for you. And vocalization of that really was, because sometimes when you're in such a bad place, you don't really notice the actions that are going into it. But when they really state that, you realize their actions after the fact. Obviously, they have to be followed by such actions as, being there for you. But it really does make you aware. And it just makes you just a step closer to getting some help as well.
I think it's just about making sure your child can be vulnerable with you. Just letting them be yeah, it's okay to be upset because I'm your parent and that's what I'm here for, That's part of what I'm here for. So just letting them be vulnerable with you.
All right. This next question is for Cole. At what age were you able to come out to your parents? And do you have any advice on how to come out or how to know that maybe it's not the right time? And can you just kind of generally share your experience?
So, I've known since 6th or 7th grade. It was very difficult because, like I said, in my very small community, I live in Alva, where the cows are. So it's a very rural area, and I'm not really able to express how I feel very often, especially when I was in middle school, in fear that I would be harassed and something would, not only mentally, but somebody would physically hurt me. And I was always living in fear. I was also, like I said in my speech, living in fear to the fact that I felt like I was the person in the wrong. I felt like I was doing something wrong, which, shocker, I'm not. But it's really difficult to, obviously come out. And the time that I remember I sat down with my mom, it was actually after Sunsplash. And I just kind of sat in the car and I was like, kind of hinting at the fact. And she was like, what are you trying to? And I was like, yeah. And then that happened. I didn't really come out at that point. I'm trying to think about like when it was actually that I think it was like around freshman or sophomore year when I really started to open up, because I really have never sat down, which is, I don't know if it's good or bad. It's worked for me, but I've never really sat down and talked to my parents and been like, look, like this is what's going on. They've just kind of like followed behind me the like step of the way. And I've noticed that they've gotten a lot better about being there. They've gotten a lot more accepting. It's gotten a lot better. I personally have never really sat down, especially talking to my dad. But my mother and I have had like conversations, honing it on the fact of like, if it's a good time or not. You really have to think about like, which you shouldn't, but in reality, you have to think about like what they're going through at the moment. I know that sounds terrible, but also like if you want the response that you need at that time, then you also have to understand like where they're at as well in their mindset, kind of poke around at the idea maybe a little bit before you generally just like release it out into the world. It's a big thing to let yourself become aware of who you are. It's another to let others. And as soon as others, discredit those feelings or don't agree with them, it's really difficult. But if that does happen, I also wanted to touch on you have to keep moving forward because it's not something we can control. I was told by a family member that it was really difficult on so-and-so in my family. And it's hilarious because it's really difficult on them. But I've gone through a lot throughout situations with everyone, with people that I've, come in contact with. I'm not seen as Cole, I'm seen as the gay kid. And it's not a label that I want to, put out there all the time. But it's fine because I've embraced it and it's a-okay. But yeah, I definitely think that it's very difficult, but you will get through it because it's not a choice. Again, it's not a choice because it's just who you are. And, just like the color of your skin, you just can't see it as clearly, but it's there and you have to accept that. Thank you.
For anybody, do you have any tips for how to calm down, like before you freak out or any other reason?
Breathing. I know it's difficult at that moment, but I actually have this one coping mechanism I use when I'm freaking out. And yes, I freak out and people can tell I freak out a lot. There's this one thing that you can do. It's called the 5 senses. And you want to look each at your senses and see what you can spot out. Whether it's smelling, what can you smell? What can you hear? What can you taste at that moment? Anything in those moments. That's my best advice I could give you there. Other than that, breathing, count to 10, count to 20, however long it takes to calm yourself down. And it's okay, go to the bathroom. You don't have to do, and these are things you can even do in a public place. You don't have to make it like social that you're doing this, but you can still do it.
One of the things that I do most often is just talk about it with someone. Or maybe write it down. If you explain your feelings to yourself, and it doesn't matter whether someone else is there or not, if you put your feelings into words somehow, it always helps, at least for me. I don't know whether that works for everyone, but it always was one of the best coping mechanisms. And another thing I wanted to say is sometimes it's good to have a good cry. Honestly, crying can be really helpful sometimes just to get all of those feelings out. Just let all of your feelings be known to the world, even if it's not known to the world. So yeah, that's my advice.
Yeah, good. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that sometimes we perceive when we cry ourselves that we're somehow weak, but you're right. That cry is I always tell people it's a great stress relief. It's great physically and emotionally, and it's okay. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add is just the observation that anxiety or panic or freaking out, however you want to talk about it, I think it's best thought about as a kind of a trance state. And so all of the things that people talk about to deal with that, whether it's DBT skills training or CBT or crying or painting, or these are all ways of breaking the trance. And so I think you want to, or another way of putting it is to change the set. So that if your anxiety has taken you over, the first order of business is to figure out a way of changing your mindset to be focused on something else. And there are lots of techniques to do that. I'd recommend, for those of you who want to look at Marsha Linehan's workbook on dialectical behavioral therapy, that's worth it. Some of the mindfulness meditation techniques, talking, as people have talked about, writing. These are all ways of just breaking the trance, and they work, but they take practice. You have to practice them. You have to figure out what works for you, and just hone that skill. That's what therapists do for people who have these kinds of troubles.
Also, I think sometimes when you're freaking out, you're having sometimes like irrational thoughts. So just identifying, sometimes it's hard, but sometimes to sit down and just like identify, this thought is probably irrational. I know I do that sometimes where I'm like, I like have a thought and then I'm like, that's not a logical thought. Like that's just irrational. And I need to sit down and say, okay, this is irrational. How can I go about this thought being irrational and figure out how to stop or calm down if it's an irrational thought? And because the thought process or the way you deal with something being irrational versus rational is very different. And a lot of times the things you're thinking about, like don't even make sense, but just like, they're just not plausible.
Piggybacking off of that as well, one thing that I do is, especially with school, oh my gosh, if I get like a bad grade or something that's going on in school-wise, grade-wise, I always think like, is this gonna matter in 5 years? Is this gonna matter in, a month maybe? Like you really have to put it into perspective in the time period that you were in, and also the different situations that you're going through at the time as well. That could be, it's not just one thing that stresses you out. It's a bunch of things before you blow up. Usually people don't have mental breakdowns after, tripping, but like, if they, fall down or something, and it's just like everything else that they went through that day, they break down, or that month, or that week. And you just really have to identify, like you said, like what you're going through and why you're doing so. And also, will this matter in the future?
I see that Kids Minds Matter is a title sponsor of this event. Can you tell us a little bit more about what they are doing in the community regarding youth mental health?
Okay, I think that comes to me. So Kids Minds Matter began in 2016, started by my good friends Susan Goldie and Scott Spiesel. Scott was very explicit about the fact that he has a daughter who suffered from bipolar disorder, quite severe bipolar disorder. And he and the family struggled mightily to get good help, even though they were in Philadelphia, and she was seen, I think, at CHOP there. When they came down here, they began this grassroots organization called Kids Minds Matter, which is connected to the foundation at Lee Health. And it started out, as a very kind of straightforward grassroots philanthropic organization. Over the last several years, having raised, several $1 million, what's happened is that it's become, I think, a pretty important organizing force in Southwest Florida to provide resources for pediatric behavioral health. A lot of that has been centered around Golisano Children's Center and building out the behavioral health service line there, providing, monies for many more therapists and psychiatrists and psychoeducational programs. But it also has a big community component like this. We spend a lot of time, money, and resources partnering with all manner of outside agencies and institutions, the schools, Hazelton. We do lots of these community outreach functions because we believe that working in the community is really our first priority. So Kids Minds Matter is playing a huge role as they are today. And if you need more information, please go to the Kids Minds Matter Facebook page, or feel free to contact me. I'm always happy to talk about them. Great organization run by great people.
Could I possibly also, like the last question that we had, how I answered that, just saying like, really think about like the time and everything. It's a-okay if you can't do that too. It's like, it's really important to understand that everything that we're talking about up here, yes, you can make an effort to do so, but it's so important to understand if you can in that moment, that is a-okay as well. Like, it's just in a different way of saying like you're going through something. Yeah, like there are coping mechanisms, but if you can't do that at that time, it's also very okay to understand that it's okay not to be able to, deal with that and figure out how to get around it and let yourself, fall down and again and then get back up, but you have to crawl before you can walk again. So just remember that.
I think that goes back to like expectations of like mental health and just and being healthy. You're gonna have those ebbs and flows, and some of the things we're talking about today too goes into self-insight and self-regulation. And so you're gonna fall, you're gonna trip. When you learn how to ride a bike without training wheels, you'll probably fall, scrape your knee, but soon and very soon you'll be able to ride, and it'll be smooth sailing. So yes, good point about expectations when we talk about mental health, because all of the speakers here, this was a journey. This didn't just happen yesterday, and it's still a journey. And so yeah, we have to be a little bit more kind with ourselves. We're so hard on ourselves, and we'll be there for our friends and everybody else, but when it comes to us, we're hard on ourselves. So that's a good expectation. Like, I may not get it right today, may not get it right tomorrow, but it's okay. Yeah.
Shout out. It says more of a comment to the students. Bravo for being here today and sharing your stories. I can't say enough how powerful and impactful this event is. Thank you.
Yeah.
Here.
I agree. This next question, I'm not sure what it's referring to because I was kind of moderating the chat, making sure things were going smoothly. But it says, can you repeat the name of the book, please?
Oh, yeah. It's Marsha Linehan's DBT workbook. Linehan is Linehan, I believe. Look her up on Amazon. You'll see she's written a ton of stuff. By the way, Marsha Linehan is someone who's very open about the fact that she herself has struggled with borderline personality disorder, and the DBT, the whole DBT program is really dedicated to managing emotional dysregulation secondary to trauma and borderline personality disorder. So she's right out there talking about it as a way of dealing with stigma and discrimination.
Question. It says, where should someone go to start looking for help?
That's a very good question. There are many front doors to getting help. There's not just one place. I think the way that I would put it is find those people, and it's generally going to be people, who are readily available to help you, whether they're friends, their parents, their teachers, their primary care doctors, their professionals like those of us here. There are lots of places to go, but sort of along the lines of what all of our wonderful students have said, you have to find people who are available, trustworthy, willing to listen. That's where you start. And then assuming those people are not going to let you down, and most often they won't, they will help you get to the right place. That's kind of how I think about it.
I also wanted to just, I thought it was something to like add. I don't know about you guys, but after the question was asked, the silence afterwards was quite loud. And because it's such a question that like everybody's like, well, where do I, you know what I mean? Because it's really difficult to get help. It's not so easy. It shouldn't, and that's terrible because it should be a lot easier, but also we make it really hard on ourselves because we don't know, who we can trust. But, one thing that I can say is that if you have a teacher that you have like a special bond with, like some of the teachers that I do, they will listen to you because they genuinely care about your well-being. but you really have to know who those teachers are as well. That's just like one big thing, because like I literally sit down. Her name is Mrs. Sizemore. She's our AP Psych teacher at our school, and I literally just walked into her room one day, and it was like when I was like, I think I need help. And I just started crying and crying. And she had a study hall, and everybody was looking at me. And I was like, it was great. But, you know, it was just, I didn't even care at that moment that everybody was looking at me, because she literally was so engaged in understanding and wanted to talk and help. It meant the world to me, because that's the reason why I like went and, you know, talked and tried to help, you know, talk to different people as well. So thank you.
Also, just start with one person. Like, one person will turn into a support system, hopefully. So like, if you start with one person, you're going to start building a support system of people you trust, and just make that group people you trust and people you care about and people who care about you, and that, you know, that it's important that they are there for you when you need them, and that will be your support system. And that's super important, especially if you're going through something.
What I wanted to say is, if you're a kid, I know it can be really hard to be understood by people simply because you are a kid, and the stereotype is that kids are kind of stupid and don't really know anything about the world yet. So if you're a kid, I would say start with your parents. If your parents don't listen, go to your guidance counselor at school, because they are trained in helping kids with things like that. And even though they're really just put on the back burner for schedule changes and stuff like that. So go to one of them. And if they don't listen, then there are always hotlines that you can call on your phone. I remember one time I was just not having it one day, and I actually called a crisis hotline, and it really helped calm me down. So just Google it, find a hotline if you need to, and just go to your trusted adult resources if you are a kid. And if you're an adult, then it's a lot easier to research a good psychiatrist or psychologist that you can go to. But yeah, that's my advice.
And another thing I wanted to say about that is the hotlines. I think it's something that I really was in, you know, going through middle school and everything. I was like, oh, I'm not that upset to like call someone about that. Oh, that's not that big of a deal. But it's funny because it's a whole paradox, because if you don't think it's that big of a deal, then why are you freaking out so much? And why are you so upset about this? And that's what they're there to do, is to help you calm down and understand that things are so, you know, things that seem so big are actually minuscule. And, you know, it's interesting because it, you know, like I said, it's a paradox, but we just have to, you know, not feel as, we don't have to, like I said before, don't invalidate your emotions and feelings, and, you know, call if you need help.
I would also say support groups are another way to receive help. And now with this whole, you know, COVID-19 thing, everything is virtual, taking advantage of virtual opportunities where you don't have to leave your home. You may be able to find a group that's in another county or another state. You know, if the resources in your community are small, like you mentioned, Cole, going to a smaller school. And so I think support groups are also a way to seek help and figure out where you plugged in to. So maybe you're going through virtual school, so you're not in the classroom, but you go to you have a pediatrician, and maybe at your doctor's office there's a medical social worker there, or, you know, whatever have you. So try to think, where am I plugged into? Is it a religious community? Like, who is your community? And then starting there and building from there.
And thank you especially to the panel for being so ready and open to answering those questions. We ask that you stay, as Dr. Simeone is going to make some closing remarks in just a moment. Thank you.
It's always hard when I have the honor of providing the closing remarks for student-led events like this. I always feel a little daunted. I always feel a little bit like I'm following Lincoln at Gettysburg, which is you never want to be in that position of following Lincoln at Gettysburg. This has been nothing short of amazing from my point of view. I just want to thank everybody who has taken part here. First and foremost, all of you students who have done such an amazing job. Those of you in the audience, I hope this has really been as impactful for you as it has for us. It's been really wonderful being here, not just because it's good to get out of the house and be with people. Sorry that you couldn't be here for that, but it's really been wonderful. I just can't say enough about how important this kind of event is. And as I said in my opening remarks, it really is about the conversation. What's most important is that we need to keep talking about all the various things that have been put on the table today by such wise people as have been here. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to Lauren and Cheryl and everybody who's participated, our panelists, our student helpers, everybody. And I just want to honor the journey. I want to honor the struggle, and I want to honor what I have come to call the Meaning Project. I've been thinking all morning about, I've had this poem that won't leave my mind, and as a clinical psychologist who is interested in the unconscious, I'm going to speak from my unconscious. So this is a poem that is near and dear to my heart. It was written in the 19th century by the German Romantic poet Rainer Maria Rilke. And it goes like this. God will not be lived like some light morning. Whoever climbs down the shaft must give up earth's repleteness for the craft of mining. Stand hunched and dig him out in tunnels. Thank you, everybody. It's been great.